Welcome to the Ask JT podcast, where we simplify tax, finance and business decisions for UK business owners. I'm Justin Turner, an accountant, business owner and author. I'm going to share practical advice and help you run your business more efficiently and keep more of what you earn. When a member of staff came to me and said, me and the others need to complain about Bob's body odour, I knew I was in trouble. That was one of the more memorable HR issues that I've dealt with, but it's not been the only one. I think over the years, I've had an employee steal a computer from me, someone storing inappropriate images on a work phone, and even an apprentice who apparently was at college but never actually went. Small business owners really only think about HR when something's gone wrong, and often by then it's too late. Anyway, a few weeks ago, I met a really nice lady called Carol Butts, and she's joining me today. Carol's got a wealth of experience in HR, and she's recently taken a leap into running her own small business. She's practical, she's experienced, and she's down to earth. And that's exactly why I wanted to record something with her. Carol, could you give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, of course. I've got over 25 years experience in various sectors across manufacturing, professional services, which includes law firms and accountancy practice. So an absolute wealth of experience at senior level positions. I decided at the end of July this year that I would launch Accelerate HR. The advantage of employing somebody like myself, that you get my senior level experience, expertise and support without the need to recruit or pay for a full-time hire. Cost is a challenge for many small businesses. And what I do at Accelerate is I work as an extension of the business's management team. So I offer practical, tailored HR advice and solutions that will fit a particular business. So the advice I offer is really specific to that business needs. And what my biggest aim is to take the stress of people management out of businesses so that business owners can really focus on what's important to them, and that's growing their business and running their business.
I think that's where I want to kick it off today, is before we get into all the kind of serious stuff, I want to have a bit of fun, because the clients come to me and tell me all sorts of things. Yeah. So can I give you some of those kind of sound bites that clients have given me, and you can tell me whether they're myth or fact.
Okay.
So to start us off, is a client said to me recently, no contract, no rights.
Myth, absolute myth.
Oh.
That's an absolute no.
Okay.
Even if an employee doesn't have a written contract, and we should know that it's a day one right, so they should be given an employment contract or a statement of their terms either before or no later than their first day. But even if a company, and believe it or not, I have worked with businesses who don't have any contracts in place, an employee does still have protected rights, regardless of whether a formal contract has been issued or not.
I think I might come back to that shortly in a minute. So let's have another one though. A myth or fact, if someone's not on a contract, then the employer is better protected.
No, absolutely not. Again, that's a myth. And for all the reasons I've said before, because even without a contract, an employee does still have statutory rights. And, those are the rights to be paid, protection from unfair dismissal, right to holiday pay, right to sick pay, right to notice, and obviously, like I said, a right to a written statement.
So here's one that I get asked all of the time. I can just pay someone as self-employed, then I don't need a payroll scheme or paperwork.
So again, that's a myth, and it's actually illegal. So if somebody isn't a genuine self-employed person, then you actually are breaking the law, and very dangerous territory to get into.
That was a bit of a loaded question, Carol, because I was just looking for confirmation for all my clients who asked me that. Someone in the industry of HR to just confirm what I've been telling them for many years. So the next question is, if someone's still on probation, I can dismiss them with no process.
No, that is a myth. So even though somebody has got less than, which at the minute is 2 years service, and I know, we might come on to the employment rights bill. I'm sure you've got some questions later on about that. And it's going to be obviously day one right to have that protection. So absolutely, you must still follow a fair and lawful process. So taking them through a disciplinary process and investigation. It's all about how people treat employees and just give them that fair opportunity. So yes, it is absolutely a myth. You do still have to follow a process, and organisations will have policies and processes. And
the next one I heard, well, it's a 0-hour contract, so it means I've got zero obligations.
No, again, that's a myth. All of these are myths. So 0 hours, it refers to the lack of guaranteed work. It does not remove the worker or the employer's legal rights and obligations. So, for example, you must at least pay that worker on a 0 hour contract minimum wage. They're entitled to paid annual leave and to be protected from discrimination.
The next one I heard, I don't need to pay redundancy when someone's been employed with us for less than 2 years.
That's a fact. Though you have to have 2 years of continuous employment to qualify for redundancy. So if somebody was made redundant with less than 2 years service, yes, it's quite right. They would not get a redundancy payment. However, they are still entitled to their contractual notice pay. They're still entitled to wages for any hours, days that they've worked, and also for any holiday pay that they're owed.
And then recently, a client was talking to me about an HR problem, and I suggested your services. I think they said to me, but hang on, Justin, why do I need Carol when I've got ChatGPT? Surely that's a fact, is it not?
ChatGPT or any AI tool that you want to use, are brilliant. I mean, I use them every day. They are a fantastic tool. However, the key thing is it lacks human empathy, it lacks judgment, and it doesn't have a strategic oversight. So yes, you might be able to get some basic responses, but it actually won't help you deal with the particular issues that you've got at hand. For that, you do need an experienced HR consultant.
It sounds like things are a lot more complicated than people think. I often joke about there are a lot of pub tax advisors out because people come to me and say, oh, Jimmy down the pub has been telling me about X, Y, and Z. And I quickly highlight that that's not the case. And I hear it a lot with HR advice as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's the same with business owners. They get, other business owners get together and they say, oh, well, I heard that you could do X, Y, and Z. And I think it is really, really complicated. There's a lot of clients take on new staff without any real paperwork, no contracts, no checklists, there's no induction sheets, no handbooks. And it's usually happened when the clients are really, really busy and they're just desperate for help. So they're running kind of non-stop. Their recruitment process has been pretty brief and they feel like they haven't got any time. No employment contract. I mean, is it really a big deal?
Yeah, it's a legal requirement. It's a statutory legal requirement. They must have a written statement of particulars, employment contract, call it what you will. Lots of small businesses don't realise, like you've said earlier, that absolutely is a requirement. But there is a way to remedy that, and it's to make sure that contract is given as soon as they become aware that it is a legal requirement.
Can I ask you what the top 3 preventable HR mistakes you see on a regular basis, maybe every week? Is there a simple action that we can take to kind of avoid them?
So for the first one, I'm going to bundle a few things into one. Not having an up-to-date handbook, out-of-date policies, and either not issuing employment contracts or poorly drafted contracts, which exposes both the employee and the employer if there's ever a dispute. The second big one is not tackling performance issues. And I think this is a real biggie for lots of businesses of any size and shape, because people quite often don't like to have what they see as a difficult conversation. But what will happen if they don't address particular issues in a business, then unfortunately they escalate until you have a far bigger problem, which is going to be much more complex, much more time consuming, and much more difficult to address. The third one is not training new employees, and I would include inducting new employees. Businesses spend a lot of time on recruitment, really making themselves be attractive to a future employee. And then the employee comes in with all these expectations, and then they don't have an induction or not a well-prepared induction. They don't receive any training or coaching or mentoring. And then that has really significant problems on engagement, motivation and morale going forward. So I think those are probably the big 3 general ones that I would highlight.
And I see that a lot with clients because they're under so much pressure to take somebody on that they almost just throw them in at the deep end. And I think sometimes stepping back and taking a bit of time it's going to obviously pay dividends for them.
Yeah, 100% would agree, yeah.
So on to follow that is, do we need some professional help here with contracts? Do you think people can muddle through it on their own, or do we need someone like you?
Let's be honest. We know, we've talked about ChatGPT, so that could quite easily, if you put some questions in and some specific information, that could generate a contract for you. You can go on the ACAS website. There's various resources online that you could use. But the one thing, using somebody like myself who is experienced, who is professional, we ensure that the contracts are particular to your business and particular to that position. So there will be certain clauses in different contracts that are required depending on the role that an employee has. Absolutely. Yes, somebody could cobble, and I'll use that word, cobble one together. But there's nothing, it absolutely is important to get it properly checked to make sure that it is compliant and that you're not exposing the business to any risks going forward.
I presume your firm could kind of step in and sort these documents out for people really quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first engage with a client, Justin, the first things I ask to look at is the contracts. So I can go through and just highlight if there's any particular issues or concerns, employment handbooks and policies. So absolutely, contracts is one of the first things I will always review when I engage with any new client.
So for a business like mine, where I've got a team of 6 employees working with me, just imagine for a second that I had nothing in place. What would it cost for an HR specialist like you to come in and review everything?
I think it really depends on the complexity of the positions, the employees, understanding are the contracts similar or are the different complexities. So then there's, different contracts need different clauses, etc. How many policies, etc. would be needed. So what I would do with any organisation that I'm first engaging with, I'll carry out an HR audit with them to understand their current position, identify any risk factors and any gaps, and then put recommendations in place. So if, for example, it was a retainer package where I work regularly with particular clients, you're probably looking at a ballpark figure of somewhere around £150 plus VAT per month.
That's kind of a 6-employee team.
Yeah. And again, the caveat around that is it really depends on the nature of the business, the complexity of the business, the complexity of the individuals, contracts, etc. But as a ballpark figure, that would be a starting figure of 150 plus VAT.
And a client said to me the other day, he said, I've been in business for 20 years. I've had no problems at all. Is it worth me paying for HR now when I've had no problems?
I think if they haven't had a problem, then they've been incredibly lucky, and that's quite a unique position to be in. But I think absolutely, I mean, if you think the figure that I've given you before for £150 plus VAT, per month for a business, just to have that expertise on tap, so available at the end of a Teams call or a mobile call, the ability for that person to come on site and talk through if there's any particular issues, it is absolutely, I would say it's really, really important. And it depends on the size of the business, but it's to make sure, every business can develop and grow. What are the objectives of that business? I'm sure that business wants to grow. What are the strategic objectives? So somebody like myself who has senior level HR experience and has worked at that strategic level, I can come in and also provide that additional holistic support to help that business drive that strategic growth and provide further advice. But you need to look at things like training managers. If you have managers, and they're responsible for interviewing, taking them through interview technique training to make sure that the interview follows due legal process, etc. is not discriminatory, is not using any bias, to make sure that they onboard people correctly, to coach managers and having difficult conversations, or business owners and having difficult conversations and handling those difficult conversations. So absolutely, I think for me, it's a safety net. And just to have somebody at the end of that phone for what is relatively quite an effective price, I think would be a brilliant insurance policy for business owners to have that resource.
I do see a lot of business owners doing things really badly with their staff. I think people just don't have the experience to do it.
Employment law changes so frequently. That's my professionalism. I ensure that, I'm a member of the CIPD. I've got an MA in HRM. I make sure that I'm kept abreast and kept up to date with any changes in legislation, any changes in best practice. So a business owner, quite rightly, is busy developing their business and may not necessarily be aware of all of the changes. And then you've got the imminent, obviously, Employment Rights Bill. So if something goes drastically wrong, a single avoided claim, which I would aim to do to stop anybody going to employment tribunal, could pay for years of HR support.
Now, that's a very interesting point to make.
Yeah.
Is just the cost. And I think going back to that client who said, I've had no problems for 20 years,
Yeah.
I think a monster claim could quickly burn up what they what they would have paid.
Absolutely. We brought AI and ChatGPT in earlier in the conversation. I regularly speak to employment lawyers, and what I'm seeing, what they are seeing, is a real upsurge in grievances from employees, more so than ever before. And the grievances are really complex and really detailed. And I'm talking 8-9 pages long. And you can tell that employees generated, they put some key words into ChatGPT, and then that's generated them a grievance letter. So we've got all of this new territory that employers are having to contend with as well. So, having HR support there to help guide them through that is invaluable.
I think that's one of the interesting things about AI is AI will always side with you when you put the prompt into AI. And I saw this recently, and I've been dealing with a married couple, and the relationship is breaking down. And I'm trying to work as an impartial person on their company accounts, whether they're joint owners. And one party doesn't agree, and of course, I could tell they were pumping it into AI. So I found myself actually AI proofing my own emails because it will always side with them. And that's when I was trying to AI proof, I said to the AI model, I mean, this sounds a bit crazy. I said, why are you always siding with the other party? And it just came back and it said, well, that's my job. And I think that's the thing with HR is I think businesses need to realize is that an employee pumps information into
Absolutely, 100%.
AI, it will absolutely side with them. I've got another really important question from one of my clients, actually, that I'm desperate to ask you. There's some national HR firms. They've got really long contracts. They come knocking on the door, or they ring you up, and they've got all these sales buzz phrases. And I'll be honest, they've been an absolute nightmare for our clients. And I'm thinking with one beginning with the letter P. So should we be working with people like you rather than getting tied into big national providers?
Yeah, I mean, naturally, I'm going to say yes, 100%. But I think the reason for that is these national providers, they do tie businesses into very long contracts, typically 5 years. And it's really difficult for employers to get out of those contracts. And I've got many businesses who are really fighting and have involved lawyers to try and get out. But the T's and C's are so watertight. And what these big nationals do as well is they tend to roll the contracts. So when you come to the end of the 5th year, you don't realise that you've actually signed to be on a rolling contract. Yeah. So before you know it, you're tied into another 5 years that you can't get out of. And I think with the nationals, don't get me wrong, they're large businesses, so they have a lot of resources. They can offer 24/7. But if we're being realistic, how many small business owners actually need 24/7 support? And if they've got a good relationship with their HR consultant, that HR consultant, I know I do, takes calls out of hours if they've got something that's worrying them. Absolutely not a problem, because HR consultant will build that relationship and we have a vested interest. So we're not there just to provide advice. Like I said at the beginning, I'm there to be an intrinsic part of that business. So I really want that business to thrive and to do well. So I feel passionate about that business. You won't get that with the national companies. And I think when you ring the helpline, you get an advisor at the national companies. And that advisor typically is reading from a script. They will not have the experience HR consultants like myself have, who have been in industry for so many years, working across a variety of sectors at various senior levels. So they don't have that knowledge. And I think I was speaking to a client yesterday who is tied in to that exact company and hadn't received the best advice. And now they're in a little bit of a pickle. And they've come to me to see if I can work with them to try and resolve what's happened. So I've heard lots of horror stories of the advice. It's not always the case, but quite frequently I do hear, and I'm quite alarmed to hear that some of the advice that these big nationals gives, it's not specific to that particular business because they just don't understand that business.
Yeah, I think with contracts in business, just to slightly digress, is I see this a lot with telephone systems. And to some degree, I can understand the telephone system being contracted because the telephone company might be giving you hardware as part of that deal, and it will take you a number of years for them to repay that. But it always seems very strange for something like HR advice to be on a contract because there isn't that upfront. Why do you think people do it like this? Is it just pure profit seeking?
I absolutely do think it's pure profit seeking and it's just tying people in. For example, if you go with an independent HR consultant, myself and others, there's lots of others on the market. We will only ask our businesses to sign up to, say if it's a retainer, a 12-month contract. But, and this is the key, we will have a 2 or 3 month termination clause in that. So you could even just be 6 months down the line, serve 2 or 3 months notice, and that would end that retainer. And that's really important because we are providing a very personal service. So the client has to be completely comfortable that there's a fit, that HR consultant is a fit with that business. And if it's not a fit, and if we don't share the same values and there's a little bit of a mismatch, as a HR consultant, I wouldn't want to work with that business because I would want them to get somebody who's going to suit them better. So that's why we don't tie ourselves in, because at the end of the day, we're a business, but we have the human element of it, that personal touch, and we want the best for our clients, whether that's moving them on to somebody else or continuing on with contracts. So we absolutely, you've got that safeguard, that the safety net is you're not tied in for any great length of time, and there is a get out clause as well.
I mean, when I wrote that question, I had one particular client in mind where that's exactly what happened. He's with a national provider. They've rolled the contract over, and he's got some really kind of big problems in his HR issues at the moment that they're not resolving. I mean,
I think it's really difficult because you need to look at the T's and C's, and I would even say maybe get some legal advice. Obviously, it's way outside my remit, and I think the T's and C's are quite watertight, and I have known lots of business that have tried to get out of those contracts and have really, really struggled. But if they aren't providing the right service, if they're even providing advice that's incorrect, then that might be the get out for him. He might be able to push back and say, look, you're actually not doing your due diligence, you aren't providing the right advice, I'm not getting the service that I signed up to. So, these are all the things that they could do. But I think certainly I would say, you possibly would need to speak to a contract lawyer who will really understand the ins and outs. And I know that's an additional cost, but it's really, to get the best advice. And actually, in the long run, that might be far cheaper than continuing to pay that long-standing contract, and then also dovetailing that with signing up to a HR consultant like myself, which I know a lot of businesses do. And that's wrong. And that's wrong for the profession.
Well, yes, absolutely. I suppose one of the bits of advice that I gave him the other day is give your notice straight away formally. Find the contract, dig out exactly how you give the notice, and give the notice so there's no danger of it rolling over again. I think people get so disenchanted that they don't actually give the notice, and then all of a sudden they've been in this government contract for 15 years.
That is a really, really good point. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. For anyone who's kind of thinking about getting HR support, what are the kind of key things that they should look for before choosing a provider?
If you're going down the independent route, so looking at independent consultants, I think word of mouth and recommendation, somebody who's had experience of that consultant before, knows their work style, their ethic, their values, etc. Avoid long contracts. So anyone that's going to tie you in to anything more than 12 months. And for independents, that is usually the maximum that any of us would sign anybody up to. So avoid any long contracts. Be wary of large exit fees. So punitive notice periods, like we're just describing about some of the nationals, and automatic renewals. So, a lot of independents won't do automatic renewals. If you are engaging with a HR consultant on a retainer basis, which is obviously the contract, make sure that you know what that retainer includes and what counts as additional support. So, a lot of the time the retainer, say, for example, I quoted 150 plus VAT before, that will be for specific support. Then if any additional support's needed, there is usually an hourly rate charge for that. All of this would be agreed between, the consultant and the business when they're forming the contract and the relationship. Absolutely crucial is to ensure that the HR consultant is aligned to your business's vision and values.
I didn't really want to get into real technical detail, because that's not really what my podcast is about. It's about helping kind of small business owners find the right direction. There's lots of buzz phrases like right to work, living wage, working time regulations. And I think it's easy to switch off. And I think HR is often portrayed as like scaremongering when it's about getting the basics right. I wanted to ask you about one particular client. He's a decorator. Mentioned him in another episode, and he wants to take on an apprentice. But honestly, he's terrified. He's heard like there's so many rules. He's heard horror stories, and he's almost talked himself out of taking on an apprentice. On top of that, he's worried about minimum wages, training, taxes, pensions, how to put documents in place. I mean,
Yeah.
Carol, tell me, what should he do?
Yeah, I think if that's what he needs and he's got to that stage in his business where he needs some additional support, absolutely apprentice is the way to go for him. And the first step was obviously to choose the right apprenticeship, which is going to be painting and decorating. If he finds a training provider, they will give him a lot of support and guidance. You know, he'll need an employment contract, but also an apprenticeship agreement. But the training providers will help put all that in place. He would need to create an apprenticeship service account on the gov.uk website. Obviously, advertise the role, so he can do that himself, or he can do it through the Gov website. Because he's a sole trader, he's a one-man band, he is likely to get substantial, if not 100% funding from the government towards that apprentice. Absolutely, you have to pay an apprentice minimum wage, and there's clear guidelines on what they need to be paid. Yes, legal responsibilities such as learning job specific, time off for training, which he will obviously be guided by the training provider. So there's lots and lots of support and advice that he can get to help him navigate through this when it's the first time that he's doing it. Taxes, pension, I'm sure Justin, you'd be able to provide that advice. Because yes, they will be entitled to join a pension scheme, but it depends on their eligibility and on the age and the salary. But obviously you'll be able to provide that advice. But for me, don't listen to the scaremongers. He will get the support. And I think taking on an apprentice is absolutely brilliant. It's given somebody that opportunity, but it's also given him the support that he needs to be able to develop his business. So please tell him not to be put off.
You still help someone if they just had one member of staff?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm more than happy to have those conversations with people and to guide them and give them the advice and to signpost them in the right direction, because I think a lot of the time people don't understand there is actually lots of help and support out there. It's just pointing them in that direction to be able to obtain that support.
I mean, one of my other episodes, I was talking about one of our other clients who'd been through 6 apprentices, and he was saying to me, young people, they don't know how to work. And I looked at him for a moment and I said to him, do you think you might be the problem?
Yeah.
He was a bit taken aback. I can do all the pension and tax and sort the payroll scheme, but I haven't got enough time to teach them how to do staff management. And I think you could have maybe intervened before we got onto apprentice number 3, never mind apprentice number 6.
Depending on the age of the apprentice, because remember, they're not all school leavers, we have mature apprentices. So depending on the age of the apprentice, if it's somebody who's just left school, this is their first step into the world of work. They're used to maybe having lie-ins. They're not used to working to strict deadlines and being supervised. So there has to be that little bit of a honeymoon period where that young person, that apprentice, gets used to work and life. And I think anybody recruiting an apprentice just has to be mindful of that this young person just needs a little bit of support, a little bit of encouragement, and just to understand now you're at work, you're not at school or college anymore. And this is what happens at work, but just to guide them.
When we first met, I was telling you about the fact that I rarely have HR issues in my team. I believe it's down to having solid onboarding. We do proper testing, we do interviews, we have a new starter checklist. We make sure everyone has a copy of a kind of a handbook, which tells them a bit about the organisation, and then gives them actually the back of that handbook gives them their basic procedures on how to get their email account up and running. We've got the contracts in place. But after we've got them onboarded, we're pretty relaxed. I give the team freedom. I'm focusing on well-being. I've got a company cash health plan. And I've always said, generally in an organisation, one of the biggest wins that you can have is onboarding. And I think that's whether it's new staff or new clients. And if you get the details right from day one, things like emergency contacts, health information, handbooks, procedures, contracts, inductions, everything else tends to run a lot smoother. You're hearing me talk like this about how I run things. Do you think I've just been lucky, or is there something in that approach? Have I stumbled upon like a secret formula that actually works?
I think the latter. I don't think you've been lucky. I think it was obviously a very conscious decision that this is how you're going to look after your staff. And I think you're a role model, if you don't mind me saying it, as to how you should look after staff and what employees can expect. We said earlier on that businesses go all out to throw the red carpet out to try and attract the best candidates, take them through the interview process, tell them everything they want to hear. They do the hard sell about the business, why it's you should work here, and then literally just bring them in and just leave them to either sink or swim. But what you're doing is exactly what I would recommend to clients, that you do thorough onboarding, thorough inductions, with a coach, they're mentored, they're looked after. they're treated responsibly, and you've got those fantastic values where you are really, really flexible and look after your staff. And at the end of the day, that's what keeps staff with you. And that's what staff want. They want to be treated like adults and to feel that they've got a say and a part to play in that business. So that really helps with, the engagement, the morale and the motivation. So I think, what you're doing, Justin, is perfect, and keep doing it. And I wish more businesses would follow that example. Maybe you should do a little bit of a training path and a guide on how to keep employees satisfied.
I think one of the things I've done over the years is I've spent a long time studying. It's how I've ended up writing 2 books.
Yeah.
I think there are known things that we can do. I think that's the problem, is going back to that client who'd been through the 6 apprentices. One of the things I said to him is, have you ever done any reading on employing people? Because you might be a master in what you do for your job, but you can't be a master of employing people ultimately.
No. And I think as a HR consultant, when I talked about providing a bespoke personal service, I am quite happy to be robust with clients. So if I think the issue is with them, I will have that very honest conversation with that client and put recommendations in place as to how they can overcome those particular issues. And I think sometimes, like you say, it is just pointing out to people that actually maybe the issue isn't with your employee. It's maybe with how you're treating them, and just having that conversation about what different looks like.
One of the things I said to a client recently is, I said, imagine that you could eavesdrop on your employee down the pub. What would they say about you?
Yeah.
And I think the expression on the face said everything. I've got a few final questions before we wrap up. Since COVID, there's obviously been a big move into kind of flexible working requests, home working. Are there any kind of real must-dos and kind of timelines for small employers on that sort of front?
What businesses need to understand, it is now a day one right. So an employee can put a flexible working request in from the very first day of employment. Employees can make 2 statutory requests per year. And if an employee does put in a request, then an employer must go back to them with a decision within 2 months of receiving the request. And there has to be meaningful consultation with the employee about how it's going to work, expectations. And a lot of organisations don't realise that the request can only be refused by using one of the 8 lawful business reasons. So there's 8 reasons as to why flexible working request can be refused.
Carol, I think if one of these comes up, I think we definitely need HR help, because you've already lost me.
So I'm not going into any detail. And I think the final thing is to make sure that if a request is refused, that employee is given the right to appeal. That's really, really important. The best practice is to ensure the policies reflect the law, which is, again, where I would come in when I work with the business for the first time. Make sure things like the flexible working policy does reflect what the current legislation is.
Yes. Okay, that sounds like a really complex and big thing. And
it is.
when I wrote that question down, I wasn't actually expecting it to be as complicated as that. So I think that's I think that's really, really insightful and brilliant. Thank you. Anyway, there's also a big change on the horizon as well. Is it called the Workers' Rights Bill? Have I got that right?
Employment Rights Bill.
It's the Employment Rights Bill, right?
Yeah, it's abbreviated too.
Yeah, I've been hearing horror stories down the pub. Should small business owners like me be worrying about it while it's still in its kind of draft form?
We all know that the potential changes that are going to be made. So there will be an impact on businesses of any size, but particularly small businesses will feel it hard. So, you're going to have costs, hiring and the legal risk. So there's going to be changes to unfair dismissal rights. People are going to have the day one right. Although they are talking about having a probationary period of possibly 9 months, a lot of it is still in draft, so we haven't got the definitive bill yet. You've got the stricter rules around 0 hours contracts, and a lot of businesses do employ people on 0 hours contracts, and stricter timelines around fire and rehire as well. Now, a lot of businesses have relied on that in the past, so if they're trying to put in a change, so it might be a change in working hours, shift patterns. If employees after consultation have refused, employers have typically terminated the old contract and then offered them a new contract on the amended terms and conditions. So there is going to be tighter restrictions around the use of the fire and rehire. A lot of businesses that I've been talking to are concerned about the costs. They're already trying to work out, because you've got changes to statutory sick pay. So they are trying to work out what that impact would be. And some have said they are even considering reducing their recruitment and putting a freeze on recruitment until they understand the actual implications and cost implications of the bill.
Think about me for a second, small business owner. There's this draft legislation lurking in the background. Is there one thing that I should actually care about or maybe do?
I think you need to keep informed about the specifics of the bill, and there's things coming out all of the time about various changes. What you would need to do is review existing HR policies to make sure that they are going to be compliant. So start taking a look at those now to see whether anything needs to change. And I think really importantly for small business is assess the financial impact of, say, the increased sick pay and other changes and obligations, and plan accordingly. Because the statutory sick pay at the moment, we have what we call 3 waiting days, which I don't want to get really technical. So for statutory sick pay, an employee would only get paid statutory sick pay from day 4 of their absence. Under the new bill, that's going to be a day 1 right. So from the very first day, they're going to be entitled to statutory sick pay.
Okay.
So that will have an impact on cost.
Well, I think we might have to record another episode together once all that's approved, because I think there's some really important stuff coming in there. Okay, Carol, to wrap up, if there's 3 things that a small employer could do this week to cut like 80% of their HR risk. Oh dear, that's the terrible question. Just some quick wins off you. What are they?
The 3 big things for me are contracts. So ensure that employees have a written contract in place and that it is relevant to their role and to the business, and also key policies. So the amount of businesses who don't even have the basic policies, and then when they come to do an absence review meeting with somebody or a disciplinary, they have no policy to be able to fall back on. So absolutely make sure all the paperwork, contracts, policies, procedures and handbook are all in place. Ensure that managers that you have are skilled and trained in the core HR skills. So we've talked about performance management and people not wanting to have those tricky conversations. But we know that if you don't, then things do escalate. Handling absence, dealing with conflict and interview technique training. Finally, the big one for me is to keep accurate records and respond promptly to, say, flexible working request or anything like that. But to keep accurate records, because the amount of times I've spoken to clients wanting obviously the information I need to do my due diligence, I need to get the background, I need to fully understand a particular situation to be able to advise effectively. And quite often we had the conversation, have you got a note of the meeting? No. And people haven't kept a record, and it is so important to keep records of the conversations that you have. It doesn't need to be verbatim, but just certainly, date, time, what was discussed, what was the response. So I think it's hard to choose 3, but they're probably my big 3 ones that I constantly come across with clients.
If there was one mistake that every small business should stop making, what's that?
Well, I think for me, it is performance and pushing it under the carpet and not addressing a performance issue because somebody doesn't want to have a difficult conversation or they're just not quite sure what to say. I think for me, that is the biggest issue that then quite often turns into a really significant problem. So in HR, I call it nipping and tucking. So if I become aware of even the slightest issue, it's really important to jump in and to understand what the issues are and trying to resolve those issues, because quite often it can be resolved at that lower level before anything escalates. So for me, that is the biggest, to make sure that if there are any rumblings, if people are unhappy, if there's a performance issue, don't just sit on it, because I can promise it's not going to get better on its own. People need to have the confidence to address it, or if they are unsure what to do, then obviously seek advice from somebody like myself who would be happy to support.
Today it's been absolutely fascinating, and I know I'm definitely going to be working with you, Carol, going forward. Carol, for anyone who's listening who's realised they might need a bit of HR help, what's the easiest way for them to get in touch with you or to find you online?
So I'm on LinkedIn under Carol Butt and also under Accelerate HR. My website, obviously we only launched at the end of July, so my website is in the development phase. So that will be hopefully ready in the next few weeks. So the easiest way to get in touch with me, it would be by email, which is carol@acceleratehr.co.uk.
As always, I'll pop all those links into the episode notes for anyone who's kind of listening on the move. Carol, thank you so much for joining me today. I've learned absolutely masses, and I hope everyone else has too. So yes, thank you again, Carol.
No, you're very welcome. I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks for listening to the Ask JT podcast. Subscribe for a weekly episode, and if you found this useful, share it with a fellow business owner who might benefit.